Hello again, 22nd day, second video. Now, I mostly needed that time to write some more stuff and erase some stuff on the board. Let's continue where I was. My poor drawing, I left it on there. But why I wanted to draw your attention to that is because if you can imagine this, you can see there the beginnings of a lot of technology. I've named the machine parts, and I love to have the kids figure this out for me. I say, what do you call the part that holds, well, first of all, what do you call something that's usually straight and turns in a machine? And that's a shaft. Eventually they'll say axle, they might say rod or something like that, but eventually I'll get them to say shaft, like the crankshaft in an engine. It turns. Then I'll say, well, what do you call the part that holds the shaft in place? A lot of times it's, I'll get a stick or something and show them, what do you call these things? And now and then I'll have a farm kid there, and he's a little quicker to say, well, that's called a bearing. Right. That's called a bearing. Well, right there and right there are the two spots that keep that shaft in place. Without that divot, it would wander all over. And those are bearings. Now, a bearing that pushes on the end, as opposed to just like this I think you'd call a plain bearing. The one that pushes on the end is called a thrust bearing. If you sit on a bar stool, you're sitting on a thrust bearing. When you steer a car, the front wheels are held on by thrust bearings. They're cone-shaped. So these are thrust bearings. Then I'll say, okay, now what do you call that principle that makes something turn easy? What do you call that if you put something in there to make it turn easy? And eventually they'll say lubricant. I'll get that out of them, like you need to have oil in an engine. But there's other lubricants as well. And what do you call that principle of things not wanting to turn and making heat? That's how this happens, makes heat, because it doesn't want to turn very well. And they'll say friction. That I usually get really quick. So you see, someone doing this primitive fire-making rig would have to understand about friction, lubrication. And I'll say, okay, now this stick here that I've got bent, and it's holding a thong tight. What do you call something like that you bend and it stores up energy, and if you let go, it goes back? And I'll even take sometimes a yardstick and hold it up and let it go, and whap, it'll hit the desk and kids will jump. And I'll say, you see, I'm storing energy, and whap, there it goes. Sometimes I'll go over to the door and turn the doorknob, and I'll turn it and then let it go, and it goes back. I stored energy. What is that? Well, that's a spring. So that bow right there is a spring. And I'll say, okay, what do you call something that goes around a shaft to make it turn? That's eventually I'll get a belt. It could be a V-belt, it could be a flat belt. I say you open the hood of a car, and you look and you see a lot of them there, and they're making things turn. Kids will think, oh, those are belts, yeah. The part that the belt goes over, in the modern world, it's usually machined, because people think of V-belts. But that's a pulley. Later on a field trip, I'll show you flat belt pulleys. I've got lots of them. I'll tell you more about field trips tomorrow, I guess. And then the guy with his feet over that stick in the Quest for Fire video, which is what I'm coming off of. What do you call something that holds something to something else? And I said I would use thongs or something to hold it to a big log, because that way it freed my feet up. And eventually I'll get the word clamp out of them, or vise. And all of these then are evident if you would take a VCR apart, a video camera recorder, and take it apart, or look inside a car, you would see all of these parts. And these engine parts, machine parts, are apparent in something as primitive as this. Also, if you replace this with a little stone that you stuck on there and kept doing this, you wouldn't get a fire. What would you get? You'd get a hole. Eventually you'd get a hole. As a matter of fact, this is a drill. This could also make a drill, and it was used that way. It wouldn't be a spiral drill bit like the modern ones you think of. It would go back and forth, but it would work. And that's the way they made drills. There's even a real cool one I've seen that's got a flywheel on the top and a spring that you'd use up and down. I saw kids using this in a jewelry or in a art school in Venezuela. They were making jewelry. They were using it looked like a cannonball as their vise to give it mass, and they were using a jeweler's drill. And they just go up and down like this with it, and it would spin it either way. So you'd have a drill, and then if you would take this whole thing, maybe I should write this down, maybe take an arrow and say you could have a drill, and if you would turn the whole thing on its side, you might have to have somebody else to help you, or your foot, or you might have to add a little something to it. But then, if you had a shaft turning like this, your hand's free to work on that. What kind of machine would you have? And you would have a lathe. And a lathe has sometimes been called the king of a machine shop. You've got to have a lathe. So anyway, all of this stuff is apparent in this very primitive thing. And still one other thing, I mentioned lever, I forgot about it, or a lever. If you just make some little drawing like this, at some point very early, humans figured out that if you use a stick, a pole, and you want to move, I tell kids I could move something, I could move a car by myself. Wow, how could you do that? Well, I couldn't move it far, but if I would use a lever, a long enough lever, and I'd have to have that, kids usually don't know about what the word for that is. It's a fulcrum. And I couldn't move it very far, but as I would pull this down, I would move that up just a little bit. Oh, and the one other thing you need is, once you get it up, you got to get something in there to catch what you've got. You know, kick something in there. If you have somebody else with you, stick something in there and then take another bite. Well, that's called a dog. I learned it as a dog, as a machine part. I think it's also called a pawl in a thing that it flips in and catches. But that you gain what you've already got, and with those very simple ideas. I mean, on a farm, I do this all the time. We still do that. All right, rather hurried. This has been a kind of a strange day for me. I'm teaching my class later than usual, but at least the rain has stopped. I'm using my thin shirts up because the weather's going to turn cold. All right, I think that's it for today. I might have been forgetting something, but I usually look at the videos and then think, oh, I forgot to say this. So I'll see you tomorrow.